What's up, everybody? Welcome to Moxie Bets, presented by Caesar Sportsbook. Coming up on today's show, RotoGrinders chief meteorologist Kevin Roth joins the show with some interesting insight on combining his passions of weather and sports. Plus, our March Madness bracket winner stops by. Can't wait to meet that guy. And you know it, you've got some Mox Locks coming your way. But first, let's kick things off with Mox Thoughts. All right, let's talk about the final play-in games tomorrow. The Bulls overcame a 19-point deficit to eliminate the Raptors and will face the Heat for the 8th seed. Chicago was the first 10th seed to win the play-in game tournament, and then OKC became the second 10th seed to win their play-in game, ending the Pelicans' season. The Thunder will now play the Timberwolves for the final spot in the West. So who's going to win tomorrow's games? I like the Bulls on this one. I know that the Heat are 5.5-point favorites, and they do have the advantage over the Bulls with an extra day rest. But Chicago swept the season series 3-0, winning each of those games by 8+ points. The Bulls average more points per game than the Heat do, and I just don't have any faith in the Heat right now. They don't look like they want it, and I feel like the Bulls are the friskier, gutsy team. So I'm going to go with the Bulls to advance on that one when we look at OKC and the Timberwolves. Yeah, we got Rudy Gobert, coming back into the game after he missed the first play-in game due to suspension. I'm not sure it's going to be enough with the way that the Timberwolves absolutely collapsed against the Lakers in that game. It's just not going to be for me. OKC has the edge in every other category besides defense, points per game, free throw percentage, boards, turnovers, benches deeper, you name it. Give me the Thunder in that one as well. All right, we're going to take a quick break before we come back with our guest. We'll be right back. Tickets to the game, merch, meals at iconic restaurants, stays at Caesar Palace. All this can be yours when you bet with Caesar Sportsbook. Win or lose, every bet earns reward credits, which you can redeem across the empire. Now, if you haven't started yet, register using code OMAHAFULL and then place your first bet up to $1,250. If you win, great. You keep those winnings. But if you lose, you'll get your stake back as a bonus bet. Time now for some Moxie meteorology as we welcome in our very special guest today. It's RotoGrinders chief meteorologist and creator of the Weatheredge, Kevin Roth. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today. You must have the coolest job. You're focusing on weather impacts in sports betting and fantasy sports. How did you get into this?
Yeah, it's a pretty cool gig. I'm not gonna lie. I love weather, and I'm a sports nerd as well. So I just took my two passions and kind of crammed them together, and really, it took off. I wish I could say I was smart enough to say, "Oh, there's this need, this niche that I can fill, this void."
Yes.
But truthfully, it was just from a random email from a friend who was like, "Hey, a friend of mine is looking to hire a meteorologist. I don't even know what it's for." And I sent that email, and it ended up being for RotoGrinders forecasting, essentially forecasting for baseball games is how it started, whether or not games would rain out. And it's grown. That was 10 years ago, and it's grown every year since then.
Oh my gosh, yeah, 10 years ago. It's grown so much since then. So you have your master's degree in meteorology. Did you start originally with the more traditional path, doing local news or writing for like weather.com and then got into this, or how did that happen?
Yeah, you nailed it. It was always my dream to be a TV weatherman, and so I started
Nice.
that. And you start in just tiny markets in Mississippi, and I kind of worked my way up. And I was working in Dallas when I got the email that changed my trajectory a little bit. I just felt like TV was starting to trend the wrong direction, and
Yeah.
fantasy sports and daily fantasy and sports betting was starting to come online, and that was trending the other direction. And I was like, this is kind of the intersection of my career. And so I jumped ship and been riding the fantasy sports and sports betting ever since.
Were you a big fantasy sports player already?
I was not to the level that some of these guys are that take my
Yeah.
data and my information. I would play in a season long league with high school friends or
Yeah.
whatever for football. But when you're talking daily fantasy, this is a grind every single day and so much data. I had never even heard of daily fantasy when I accepted
Yeah.
the job. But my sports background was enough to kind of carry me through the fact that I wasn't really all that sharp on daily fantasy sports.
Now, let's say when you were just a regular fantasy player, did you use your weatherman skills in creating your lineups for the weekend as well?
Yeah, definitely. And I always, I always enjoyed that. I always like looking for some sort of weather advantage. And in season long, nobody's looking at the weather. Like very few
Yeah,
people actually care about the weather in season long. It's way more important
right.
on a daily basis. But yeah, I always have enjoyed trying to find, all right, what game is it going to be 30-mile-per-hour winds or 17 degrees, and trying to work my way around those trouble spots.
What would you say is the most impactful weather situation on sports? I mean, I think it's got to be wind, right? Because wind is going to affect the quarterback. Wind is going to affect baseball a lot. Obviously, basketball doesn't so much. But is wind or is it rain? Like, what has the biggest impact weather-wise on a game?
Yeah, you nailed it. Your gut instinct is right. It's the wind. And for football, it's the wind because every other variable, both teams are going through it, right? If it's raining, the offense and the defense is dealing with that rain. If it's cold, the offense and the defense is dealing with it. If it's wind, the defense doesn't care, right? That doesn't impact a defensive player. It
Right,
only impacts when you're
right.
throwing that ball. So it has a huge impact to offenses, especially passing offenses in football. Baseball, you mentioned, what direction is the wind blowing? Is it carrying home runs out or is
Yes.
it holding home runs in? And then golf is a big one that I think people kind of overlook. You can
Mm.
get these golfers who maybe tee off at 7 a.m. and the weather's nice and quiet. And by the afternoon, when the afternoon golfers come out, those winds have cranked up to 25 miles per hour. They are at a huge disadvantage in golf too. And again, it's the wind that's the biggest issue.
Well, let's talk about golf because the Masters was just this last weekend and they had the craziest weather. I mean, some are calling it the worst Masters ever. It had to stop down, what, three different times. There was that tree that fell and thank God didn't actually hurt anybody. How do you work that into handicapping? Or obviously with RotoGrinders, I'm sure you're talking about this. Are you telling people to lay off some things? I guess you don't really necessarily give the betting advice, you just give the weather.
I do a little bit of both. Golf is not my forte as far as betting goes, but other sports that I'm more
Mhm.
familiar with, like football and baseball, I do give some betting advice there. But for
Cool.
golf, if it's wind, you can forecast that and you can pinpoint it and say, all right, we want early golfers here. But if it's rain, it's just, there's not a whole lot that's going
Yeah.
to impact the scores, right? They might stop playing, and they did, like you mentioned, three times, but it's going to be hard to get an advantage from the rain. Whereas with the
Yeah.
wind, it's pretty
Okay.
easy to do. So that's what I focus on.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's now get into the weather edge. How does it work?
It's pretty cool. This is something that I came up with. In general, when you think of baseball games, and let's say it's going to be 80 degrees at this particular ballpark, we'll say Wrigley, and the winds are blowing out at 15 miles per hour. We know that that's good for hitting, right? Just objectively, that will help balls. Hot air is thin air. So the hotter it is, the better a
Mhm.
ball carries. And then if the winds are blowing out to center, that's a big help as well. But it's one thing to say that qualitatively, this is good for hitting. What people want more and more is quantitative data. They want to know
Mm.
how good is this for hitting. So what Weather Edge does is it takes every game since the year 2000 that was played at that ballpark in similar weather conditions. So all of the games around 80 degrees with winds blowing at a similar strength and trajectory, and it pulls all the hitting data from that. It says, okay, in these games, we had an
Wow.
increase of 70% to home runs. The run total increased 25%. And then it can dive into different data as well, as far as ERA, ground balls, and fly balls, and stuff like that.
Wow. So is baseball kind of where you have like the most, I guess, analytics or weatherlytics or weather edge? Um, it sounds like it's baseball is kind of the biggest one where you can get the most from it.
It is because baseball, there's just so much data, right? And it can remove a lot of
Yeah.
the noise because it's just a guy sitting there and somebody pitching to him. And we just repeat that over and over again for 9 innings and so many games, or 162 games or whatever. So there's just a ton of data you can pull from. And if you just take all of that data and you can just isolate the weather, it removes some of that other noise, right? In some games, there was a great pitcher and nobody scored. In other games, there was a
Right.
terrible pitcher and they scored a bunch. But if you have enough
Right.
data, you can start to see those trends where you can isolate how much did the weather matter. And that is what Weather Edge does.
Oh, okay. Love Weather Edge. Definitely going
It's
to be
cool,
using
right?
this moving forward. Yeah. Are you the only sports meteorologist or are there more of you?
I think there have been a couple like come ups, a couple trying. I was fortunate enough that I was the first one to do it, so I had I guess you could say I had first movers advantage, right? I was the first person in the industry, and that really helped
Yeah.
social media grow, and that kind of helped establish me. And I think since then there have been a few other folks that kind of dabble in it, but I
Mhm.
don't know if there's room for more of us. If there is, we'll have to do a fight to the death. I don't know. But uh, yeah, I think I'm pretty much established as the go-to guy whenever there is a sports weather question. And that's really fun
Yeah.
to have these big podcasts like Pat McAfee on his podcast the other day just randomly referenced me. He was like, "My guy Kevin Roth says,"
Cool.
yeah, it's really neat that it's grown into something as big as it is because I didn't expect that, to be honest with you.
Well, I think especially with betting, gamblers, we're all trying to find whatever edge we possibly can in order, that will impact our bets. And weather is such a big part of that. So we talked about the wind in football and that, there's a lot of analytics and a lot that you can use for baseball. What do you think is the hardest sport to analyze weather for?
I think it's probably football, and it's not the
Mm,
wind, right? If it's windy, I've got a really good idea of what's going to happen. Essentially, I just if it's winds over 20 miles per hour, I want the under, and that works really, really well. And if you can do it
yeah,
early, even better because those numbers will start to drop. And you've seen those football games where they go to throw, and it's just they're not going to be able to throw it deep, or they go to punt and the ball gets boomeranged back to them because there's 30-mile-per-hour winds like coming right in their face. Those
right.
high wind games are easy and obvious, but it's okay, it's raining or it's snowing. Sometimes those games turn into a slog, right? They really slow down.
Yes.
And other times you see these snow games. Tom Brady, I think, threw for 7 touchdowns in like a blizzard once. So
It's unbelievable.
precipitation, yeah. It's precipitation. It's rain and snow that's the hardest because the impacts can vary and it's hard to quantify. So, yeah, it's going to rain. Okay, how hard is it going to rain? It's going to snow. How much is it going to
Right.
snow? So that's the hardest thing to do.
Well, and then when you say it's hard to quantify, they always say, the only thing you can trust that's going to change is the weather. So you're forecasting all of this stuff. And then up until game time, really anything can happen, just like the lines can move and change. And we do see actually a lot of shifts in line movement based on the weather. Do you suggest kind of waiting until closer to game time to seeing what that the weather really looks like, or is this something you want to get in early, like from a gambling perspective? When you see the line move, I guess based on weather, is it better to wait or kind of jump on it?
This is such a good question. I wanted to bring this up last round, so good work. Here's if we're talking about wind, that is very uniform throughout an area. Like if it's windy in New York City, it's going to be windy in all of New York City. It's not just going to be
Okay,
windy at one small area. So if it's
right.
4 or 5 days out and I'm looking at these winds and it says sustained 25 with gusts up over 40, I feel fairly confident that that is indeed going to be the case 4 or 5 days from now. Precipitation and rain is not that way, right? It can
Mm,
absolutely pour on one side of town and be completely dry at the stadium or at the ballpark or whatever it is.
right.
So when people send me, and this happens literally all the time, they're like, oh,
Yeah,
my weather.com or my phone app is telling me it's going to rain 7 days from now at this football. Should we take the under? I'm like, no.
yeah.
That's the kind of thing that I like to wait until almost right
Okay.
before. I like to see
Yeah,
how's it look 30 minutes before the game. Is it going to be absolutely pouring, or did the worst of it already
right.
fall? So yes, we can do it pretty far out with wind, but with rain, I don't recommend that.
Okay, that's really good to know, especially because the Yankees home opener here in New York, it was supposed to rain in the morning. And I remember thinking, like, oh, is this going to get rained out? I don't know what to do with this game. And it ended up being the weather was lovely for the game. It was what, like 60, almost 70 degrees. And the ground wasn't too wet. They didn't have there was no rain delay or anything like that. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think in the Mets home opener, similarly, they looked at the forecast and they said, "Oh, it's going to rain," and they canceled it the day before. They postponed the game a day ahead, which is great. Try to give the fans a heads up so that people don't end up at the ballpark and then have it be canceled. The issue was
Yeah.
when we woke up the next morning and I was looking at forecast models, I was like, "Oh, it's going to be perfectly dry," and it was. It did not rain one drop during those game time hours. So, especially with the rain, it's fickle. If you try to play that a day or even a couple days early, and it can come back to bite you a lot. And the worst thing you want to do is make a bet on weather that doesn't come true,
Yes.
right? That's worst
Oh,
case
I've done
scenario.
it.
Yeah.
I've
That's
done it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I've
and
well, because when it's heavy rain, especially in football, you're like, "Oh, bet the under. They're gonna be running the ball more. It's gonna be a ground and pound, the
mhm.
ball's slippery. They're not gonna be throwing it that much." And then, like you said, there's someone like Tom Brady that all of a sudden has 7 touchdowns. You just don't yeah, you don't know what it's gonna do. So that's really good. So if it's wind, that's something that we can try to get a little early edge on, and then if it's something like rain, wait to see what's happening right before the game. So,
Yep.
how do you think that sports weather is evolving? Like, I would love to see on Sports Center or in some of these pregame shows on ESPN or CBS or wherever, having somebody like you on there talking about the weather and how it's going to impact the game. Because you have all the analysts up there saying who they think is going to win the game. I just think it'd be so much more interesting and certainly more information for viewers and bettors alike to have someone like you up there saying what the weather impact will be.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. Honestly, I do think that's a good idea. What I see all the time, which really irks me, is during those pregame shows, which they go all morning long. They throw it out to a reporter who's at the stadium, and he's like, "Oh, it's really coming down. It's going to be a slobber knocker out here." And it's like the rain's going to be gone in 30 minutes. It's going to be fully dry
Right,
for the game. But these are reporters; they're not meteorologists, and they're just playing the
right.
role of a meteorologist. Maybe they've got an app on their phone, but usually they're just talking about what's happening now 2 hours before the game. That's one of my pet peeves when I see that. I'm just like, ugh, look at a forecast model, man. But I think the
Yes.
future, I think the future is more quantitative. It's kind of
Mm,
leaning more towards not just quantitative with data, but also quantitative with how in the past this has impacted lines or how often
right.
uh, these wind conditions led to an under. And that's something that I'm working on now. All of my quantitative
Ugh,
data talks about runs scored and hits and touchdowns, but it doesn't yet tie in the gambling data, the likelihood of an
mhm,
under. So I think
yeah.
that's the next step in getting quantitative data from a meteorological standpoint and how it impacts sports betting.
I love that because we have so many trends already that, are good for sports betting. Like this team is, 6-1 against the spread against this team in their last 7 matchups. But it would be
Mhm.
so interesting to say this team is, 2-3 against the spread in their last 5 with this weather condition. You know what I
Yes,
mean?
I,
Like,
I see.
how are
Yeah.
these specific players, like, maybe, like you said, Tom Brady, snow, no big deal. Someone like, I don't know, Jimmy Garoppolo, big deal. And
Mhm.
so it would just be very interesting to have that quantitative data, like you said, about specific players and teams and how they do in certain weather situations. Because you got to think different coaches do different things in weather. So I am so looking forward to how this is going to evolve. What is next for you? And you think sports weather? I mean, obviously you have the Weather Edge, which is great. You're gathering this quantitative data, which is so important. And to my knowledge, you're the only person doing this. But like, what do you feel like is the next step? I guess for you.
I'm kind of making that transition from where I started. It was fantasy sports, right? It was daily fantasy sports. Is
Yeah.
this baseball game going to rain out or not? Because if you play a guy in a game and it rains out, you get no points, right? That's how it
Right.
started, and it's becoming
Yeah.
increasingly leaning into the sports betting aspect of it because
Right.
sports betting's blown up, right? This is
Yeah.
the new big thing that's happened over the past few years, and as more and more states come online, it's taking that data and these forecasts that I've essentially tailored to fantasy sports and making sure I can apply them to the sports betting world to get the client or the sports better the best information that they can. I think that's the way that I'm steering the ship right now, and I think that's going to be the trend going forward.
First of all, I think it's so cool what you're doing. I can't wait to see how this progresses. And also, just on a side note, were you ever one of the guys in the middle of the storm outside when you were like working with local news or whatever? Because I always look at those guys. I'm like, I don't, as much as maybe you like this job, it's like they really put them in the eye of the storm and they're just, it's raining out here.
Yeah, and then they stand you in, like, the part where there's a wind tunnel next to a building so that the winds look extra
Yes.
strong. They give you an umbrella so it's flapping all around to really, like, drum it up a little.
So do they do that on purpose?
Yeah, yeah, I would say, yeah.
Oh, I didn't
It's
know that.
it's pretty common that they want the most dramatic shot. If it's a flooding shot,
Right.
they're gonna find the one area that's, basically in a ditch and have the person stand out
Right.
there so that they're in chest deep water, whereas on the road, it's maybe knee
Ugh.
deep.
Yeah.
I've done it a time or two, been assigned to that kind of story.
Okay.
I have not, overplayed the hand. So maybe my
Yes.
bosses were like, "Oh, he's not faking it. This isn't good." So I prefer to be at the green screen when the severe weather is happening and using the data and the
Yes.
radar to help walk people through the storm, not just like, "Hey, don't do what I'm doing right now in this hurricane."
Right,
I
it
don't.
just seems
Yeah,
insanely dangerous,
it
and it's like
is.
you said, you could be at the screen, telling people about the weather, and we don't necessarily need to see you in waist deep water with winds about to knock you over, so
Yeah, and for
I'm
what it's
glad that
worth,
you are out of that.
yeah, I do love watching that kind of coverage. Like,
Yeah.
I'm a
Yeah.
sucker for it. I will watch it all day long, but I don't think that, it's a great visual, but I don't think it's the best way to keep people safe during a storm. In fact, I think it's counterintuitive.
Absolutely counterintuitive. All right. Well, this is the chief meteorologist for RotoGrinders and the creator of Weather Edge, Kevin Roth. Kevin, let people know where to find you, where to find the Weather Edge, because I'm going to sign up for this right now.
Excellent. I love it. If you want to see all of my forecasts, that's up on rotogrinders.com, and you just go to whatever sport you want. There's a little weather tab. Just click the weather tab, do game by game breakdowns. It's very easy. I try to keep everything in the same spot. If you are looking for some sports betting information, you want to tail some of my weather picks, you can check out
Yes.
scoresandodds.com. Yes, I do have some weather picks as well. And then last but not least, make sure you follow me on Twitter. I push just about everything that I have for free out on Twitter. And my Twitter handle is at Kevin Roth WX.
Kevin, this was such a treat. I can't wait to see how far this goes and to use it now in my sports betting games. I didn't even know something like the Weather Edge exists. So thank you for coming on. I am following you. I will figure out everything that you're doing, and don't be surprised if I DM you every once in a while and ask for some weather some
I
weather
love it. Well,
picks. But
thank
thank
you
you
for
so much
having
for
me.
coming on. Time now to welcome in our next guest. He is the winner of the Moxie Bets Bracket Challenge, John Vetter. John, congratulations. How you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing great. I'm doing good. Excited.
Excited. I am excited to meet you because there were only 4 contestants that had UConn as the winner of the tournament this year. Kenny finished at 66. I was at 115. Danny 125. Why UConn? Were you just trying to be like, this is March Madness, let's just like throw in a wild card there? Or did you actually believe from the beginning UConn is this year's champion?
No, I have a buddy, my buddy Ramo. He's a UConn alumni, so I have to throw that out
Mm.
there. And we talk UConn basketball pretty much all year. I remember in January when they had that slump. We were spinning it positive, like this is good. Every team needs that slump. It's a team building thing. And so when we got closer to the tournament, we were both riding UConn, and it was good. It's always good to ride with your buddy, and it was a good time. It was a good bracket. But no, we talked about it all year
I
long, and
love that.
we
I love
truly
when
believed
there's
it.
Yeah, I love when there's a little bit of heart involved, and it's also, a sharp betting angle too. It's just you just feel very very good about yourself. Did you win any other bracket pools? Because I would say 90% of America had 0 of the final 4 in their brackets this year.
Yeah, I won. That buddy and I, we split one that we did together, and then another from. I'm an Ohio State fan, and one of their
Okay.
quarterbacks from a great year did a pool, and I won that one. So that was actually pretty cool to kind of interact with him, and that was a good time as well.
God, John, you're just winning everything this year. What sports do you like to bet? You said your buddy is a UConn fan, so you kind of rode with him on that train. You talk a lot about it. You are the Ohio State University fan. What sports do you like to bet? Is it mostly college, or do you also get into some pros?
I do pros as well. With NHL and NBA playoffs coming up, they're not things I really follow all year long, but NHL playoffs are, I mean, one of the most exciting exciting tournaments out there outside of March Madness and then the NBA. I'm Sacramento area out here in California. So now we get
Oh,
the
you
first round
are?
with
My family lives in Lincoln, California. I'm actually here
nice.
right now. Where in Sac are you?
So I'm about an hour east south of Sac. It's called Valley Springs, over by Jackson. So Jackson Rancheria.
Okay.
It's about 20 minutes away from me. So yeah, so I'm familiar with Lincoln as well. But yeah, so that's going to be exciting with the Kings and the Warriors going at each other. It kind of sucks that the Kings are the Warriors, but it'll
I
be
was
fun
going to
to see
say,
them in the
okay, I'm a
finals.
big Warriors fan. I'm from the Bay Area originally. I'm saying Warriors in 6. The Kings are good, right? They're the number 3 seed. They have one of the hottest offenses, but they lack in defense, bottom 5 in the NBA. How are you feeling about this Warriors Kings series?
It's the Warriors. You know, when they get in the
Yeah.
playoffs, I think the one thing they had it against them this year was possibly having to go on the road. They have to go to Sacramento.
Yes.
It's not going to be a road
Yep.
game. I'm not going to claim to be a Kings fan, but there's a lot of Warriors fans around here that have been
Yep.
Warriors fans for the nice 10-year run. They're going to be in that stadium. So it's going to
Yes.
be not really that much of an away game for them. So I kind of worry about that. So I don't think your Warriors in 6 is that far fetched.
Well, look, I'm just excited about it. One, big Warriors fan over here, and two, I guess I didn't think about how many Warriors fans are here in the Sacramento area, but it does make a lot of sense because the Kings haven't been in a playoff in 16 years. I will say, and credit to Sacramento and Kings fans, they are a lively bunch, and they have been for a very long time. But yeah, to your point, since there is so many Warriors fans that live in this area, they probably will infiltrate in. That was one of the questions I had: is how many Warriors fans would Kings fans kind of let in? But if they're already living here, then there's not much of a travel, even though it's only like an hour or two from the Bay Area. Do you have any locks for the NBA for us in this play-in tournament that's kicking off tomorrow or regaining tomorrow?
Yeah. So I have a future on the Boston Celtics.
Huge.
You know, so I have the Boston Celtics going all the way. I did also put in Boston and Denver Nuggets to meet up in the finals. So that's kind of what I'm
Okay.
thinking. That's what I have for now. Probably we'll dig into it more over the next couple days once series actually get going.
Yeah, I feel like in the East, it's really close between the Bucks and the Celtics. I lean more Bucks on this one. Giannis has just been absolutely crazy. The Bucks are finally healthy again, but the Celtics are scary. Jason Tatum, I mean, they got to the finals last year, so I don't hate that. I think that's pretty good. And the Nuggets, number 1 seed in the West, they've been playing so good. I just don't know how far they get in the playoffs, but I guess we will wait and see. John Vetter, winner of the Moxie Bets Bracket Challenge. Thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations. And we look forward to tailing some of your picks here and hopefully making some money.
Awesome. Can I throw out one more thing if possible?
Absolutely.
All right, so I've got one. This kind of ties in. I'll tie it in all together. Last year, my father was diagnosed with ALS a couple days before Lou Gehrig's day in the MLB. This year, Lou Gehrig's day is June 2nd. So just want people to kind of research it a little bit. I have a pick for
Yeah.
tonight, the Yankees first 5. I got it minus 130. And then to kind of help with that, laying that number, I have Judge to hit a home run. So if one of those hits, you know what? Go do some research on ALS. That's all I ask, and kind of know what it is, and if you do ever have to get that diagnosis, or someone in your family does, that's my play for tonight.
Well, thank you for your play for tonight. I hope that your dad is doing well. I'm very familiar with ALS, and it is a very debilitating disease. And if we could find a cure, if we could raise money, then let's go ahead and do that. If you tail these picks and you win, I would suggest that we all put that money towards an ALS foundation to help find a cure and help those suffering. John Vetter, thank you so much, and best of luck to you and your father.
Thank you, Katie. Y'all have a great day.
All right, folks, the time has come for Mox Locks. These are my 2 best bets For the weekend, I'm looking at baseball today, and I'm taking the Phillies money line plus 115 versus the Reds today. It's a rematch of Saturday's game between Nick Lodolo and Bailey Falter. Both played very well. Lodolo threw 7 scoreless innings while surrendering just 3 hits. Falter went 5 innings, surrendering 1 earned run and allowing just 4 hits. But I'm going to give the edge to Philly here as their offense is really starting to heat up. The Phillies have scored 21 runs in their last 3 games compared to just 14 for the Reds in that same span. They have a more talented lineup, and the Reds just seem to be a bit of a mess right now. So give me the Dogs at a cheap price. Next up, I talked about it earlier in the show. I'm taking the Bulls money line, baby, plus 185. Chicago swept the season series 3-0, winning each of those games by 8 points. They average more points per game at 113 compared to 109 for the Heat. And again, I'm just not high on the Heat. I don't think they want it. I don't think they have it. The Bulls are the gutsier team. Take them on the money line, plus 185. Let's go. This has been Moxie Bets presented by Caesars Sportsbook. Don't forget to follow us on social at Moxie Bets, and we'll see you next week.